let's jump into our first exercise. Don't worry that why this guy is saying without looking into the concepts and theory of Docker, why this guy is saying exercise. Don't worry, I'm gonna take this Docker part of sixth module uh, in in coordination with a practical demonstration as well as concept and practical demonstration will go hand in hand, so we will do it parallelly. So each concept I will explain with a practical demonstration. So that's how it works. So let's look into the installation of Docker in various systems. So let me get into the in documentation of Docker. You see that docs.docker.com engine install Ubuntu. So this is the URL. So you once you go there, you will find documentation of Docker desktop, Docker engine, Docker build, Docker compose, Docker hub, and some other concepts. Also you will find documentation about some other topics also you will find here. So but at this moment we are interested in Docker desktop. So let me click on Docker desktop and click on overview. So now what is a Docker desktop? So Docker desktop is a one click install application for your Windows environment, Mac, Linux. So that enables you to build and share containerized applications and microservices. So it provides a straightforward graphical user interface that lets you manage your containers, applications, and images directly from your machine. So Docker Desktop can be used either on its own or as a complementary tool to the CLI. So Docker Desktop reduces the time spent on complex setups so you can focus on writing code. It takes care of port mappings, file system concerns, and other default settings and is regularly updated with bug fixes and security updates. So what's included in Docker Desktop? So Docker Desktop comes up with Docker Engine, Docker CLI client, that where we can actually give commands, and Docker BuildX extensions, Docker Compose, and all other stuff. Even Kubernetes also. I will show you this. I will show all of these things in Docker Desktop. So now how to install Docker Desktop? So and one more thing is a Docker desktop works with your choice of development tools and languages and gives you access to a vast library of certified images and templates in Docker Hub. So the installation of Docker desktop in Mac or Windows or Linux. So yours might also be Windows. If it is Windows, you click here. Linux or also you click here, and Mac also you can click here. So let me click on install Docker desktop. Close this. On Mac or Windows or Linux, I would go for the Windows. So this is installation of Docker desktop in Windows. So what you have to do is, as usual, download Docker desktop for Windows. You click on download option and you download this. Your download begins here. It is 594 MB of a GB. So now to for the proper working of Docker desktop, you need to fulfill some requirements. So those prerequisites are WSL2 backend. You should have WSL Windows subsystem for Linux. You should install this before you start uh, installing Docker desktop. If you do not have WSL2, you can install the Docker desktop, but it won't work. So that's the reason you have to install WSL2 before you install Docker desktop. Hyper-V backend and Windows containers. This is specifically for Windows containers if you want to make it, and this is for Linux containers inside the Windows machine. Okay, so I don't prefer to use Windows containers. I would like to use WSL2 and make a Linux containers. Okay, so now the prerequisite 64-bit processor with second level address translation slate, 4 GB system RAM, and BIOS level hardware virtualization support must be enabled in the BIOS settings. This is also very important. If you face any issues while installing WSL2, this one, if it is not working, that means you have to check your BIOS level hardware virtualization. You have to check this. You have to get into the BIOS settings. You have to uh, stop the system. You have to shut down the system. Then when you restart the system, you have to click on F9 or F11 or F12. The function key is specific to your system. The reboot function key. So that should be clicked and it takes you to the BIOS settings. Then inside the BIOS settings, you have to enable this option, BIOS level hardware virtualization support. So then it works. Normally it will be enabled. In that case, you can easily install it and you can use it. If it is not, then you have to do this. So let's see. This is about Windows containers. We are not interested about Windows container. Now let's see the process of Docker desktop installation on Windows. Double click on Docker desktop installer.exe. So then it will run the installer. It is normal as usual, the similar way how we install some softwares. Then use WSL2. You install WSL2, then close it, and once Docker desktop has been installed, then you have to go to this. If your admin account is different from your user account, then you add your user account to Docker users, or else you don't need to do this also. Okay, with this, the very simple setup: install Docker desktop, then install WSL2. That's it, nothing much. Okay, so now I have installed WSL2 also. WSL, you see that this is my WSL. Yes, okay, you're seeing that's my WSL, and I'll stop this. It's not no more, it's required. I have installed it. Okay, and you have seen the WSL, my WSL. So then I'll show you Docker desktop. So Docker desktop also I have installed it. Yeah, so once you install a Docker desktop, you can make a connection with your Docker hub. So once you click on sign in, so it will take you to the account of your Docker hub, and then it will get signed in. Okay, okay, it's been signed in. So this is how your Docker desktop looks like. So what's the benefit of Docker desktop? You don't need to worry about a lot of commands and a lot of sub commands, options, and all those things. You can simply run your containers from here using just buttons. You can click example. So if you want to run a container, so you don't need to do anything else. Just click on a run option. An open source web server will take nginx could be a web server or reverse proxy or load balancer and HTTP cache, whichever way we can use it. So let me click on run. So path to directory, it's asking. A random one, anything is fine. Hands on. Yeah. So I gave the directory to publish and I clicked on run. Let's wait for the action to be happen. Now it is pulling nginx latest. nginx image with a latest tag. So the image is being pulled. So if you are an absolute beginner, I say I would request you to start with Docker Desktop. It's very simple, pretty simple installation. Install WSL and WSL2 and install Docker Desktop. And then configure your GitHub Docker Hub account if you have, or else you create a Docker Hub account first. So Docker Hub, creation of Docker Hub account is not that difficult. It's similar to creation of GitHub account or any other Facebook account or any other type of social media account. It's not much difference. It's not much different. So it's taking a lot of time for pulling that nginx latest image. Let's wait for that. Meanwhile, if you see, let's go through the user interface of Docker Desktop. Here you have a Docker Desktop, and here you can have upgrade plan. And here you have a search button. Here, from here, you can search about any of your image by giving the name. And here debug and settings option. If you click on settings, you can find Kubernetes extensions. You can find the Kubernetes. You can find the Docker engine. You can find the resources, proxies, network, WSL integration. If it is normally by default, it will integrate with WSL. If it is not, you can integrate using WSL. You see, WSL integration, enable integration with my default WSL distro. Whatever WSL distro has been installed in your system, we are telling to integrate with that. If it is okay. On other side, the downloaded newer image for nginx latest, it's done. Okay, meanwhile let's complete this one. So user interface, UI. So after installation of WSL2 and Docker Desktop, by default it should connect with each other, because if it is enabled, if this symbol is checked and enabled, enable integration with my default WSL distro, then automatically it will be done. If it is not, you have to come to this settings section and go to the resources and click on WSL integration and check this enable integration with my default WSL distro. Then this is your Docker engine, and here you can set your Kubernetes cluster. A simple Kubernetes cluster, not complex one. A simple Kubernetes cluster can be built here, and software updates and features in development. So this is what our Docker consists of. So now the image has been pulled from Docker Hub. Now it's time for you to it's time for Docker engine to run that image and make a container, or simply run the, now it's time to run a container. So that's what this settings consists of. Here this button, this soft button, uh, allows you to configure or attach your account with Docker Desktop. And then on left side you have a containers. all the containers that you have run or you have spun. So the containers that you have spun will be displayed here, and the images that you have downloaded will be displayed here, and the volumes which are attached with your containers and images will be displayed here. And this is dev environments. Okay, we are not going to touch this, so let's get into the images once. You see, this is nginx, which you have pulled from Docker Hub to the local. Now it is in your local machine. This nginx image is in a local machine. Okay. So now on the other side here, yes, the container has been started. The container is running now. You can see that. nginx is the name of the container, and tag is latest, nginx latest. This is the image it is using. This container is using nginx latest image. Let me take to the images and I'll show you. You see that nginx latest tag. So this image has been used to spin this container. So now our container is spinning, and ports are mapped. 32768 is mapped to the port 80 of the container. So I have to give HTTP local host to access this application, and 3 minutes ago it's been started. Let's access this application and we will do what all operations we can do with this container. So it's a local host, correct? So let me get into the browser. So here, let me take a new tab and HTTP local host and say what's the port number. 32768. 32768. Okay, that's okay. Here HTTP, okay, not secure one. Let me change the, and I put it in a wrong place. I have to put this in here, not in Google. HTTP / and yeah, now it's proper. Forbidden, okay, but you could see that nginx 1.23.3, it's forbidden, but your app is running there. Your nginx is running there. Let me get into the Docker desktop again. So let me click on localhost. You see that you got the same response, of course, because of image, but whatever it may be, your app is running. The connection for this site is not secure, so that's the reason it is not allowing. That's okay, whatever it may be, but you could see your app is up and running. It's 403 forbidden, but you could see nginx 1.23.3. okay, this is how when you spin a container you can deploy your application. So now what we can do, so normally what we do for a container, you spin a container, or you can say you run a container. How can I run a container? So before I start run a container, I will stop the existing container. I will stop this container by just pressing that stop button. Now if I want to restart, I can click. Now you see the status, it is exited status, and I can click on start button and it will be restarted. That's it. Now let me execute and see that. Yes, you can see your page. And next. So let me stop this time and let me delete this. Simple. Just clicking on delete icon. The bin icon. Just clicking on bin icon. It will delete your container. So nginx container is selected for deletion. Any anonymous volumes associated with this container are also deleted. Of course, you should delete that. I don't want it now. So the container has been deleted. Now let me get into the images. You have still nginx image. So now I want to run or spin this one. So I want to run a container using this. So optional settings, not okay. Let me check. Do you want to add any optional settings? So okay. So container name, I'm gonna give first nginx, or we'll just say first container. Host port, container port is 80. So I need to map this port 8080 port. I want to map 8080 port with this one. And volumes, do you want to attach a volumes? I don't need an environment variable is also not required. So let me run it now. So you can see the container log. It start worker process and inspect path nginx version package place, and this is the port mapping 8080 local host IP, and then port number is 8080 and terminal, and you can see that first container is running up and running now. So this is the terminal of our container, and this is the status. Memory usage is 12.4 MB. So let me get into the containers all together engine and click on this is our image. Let me get back to here, and this is image, back to container 8080 port, and here it is. Here is your application. This is our first application that we have hosted using Docker container. Congrats if you are also able to run it. It's that simple using Docker desktop. So let me minimize this. And now what I'm going to do is I will stop this container and we will see whether we are able to fetch it or not. So let me refresh it and we'll see what's going to happen. I stopped the container there. Welcome to nginx is gone because the application is closed. So now let me restart it. Okay, yeah, it's running now. It's up and running. So let me refresh it again. Yes, it is. Welcome to nginx. If you see this page, the nginx web server is successfully installed and working. Further configuration is required. And if you want to go for the online documentation, you can go for that. But with this, we are able to successfully deploy our application using container in local host machine. So this is how we build it and this is how we name it. And let me go through it one more time. So let me delete, let me stop this running container. Yeah, it stopped. Delete this container forever. Get into images, and here we have nginx. So I will build, I will run, I'll spin this. This time I'll put optional settings. Container name, second container, host port. Again, I will give you the same 8080 should be mapped with the 80 port of the container. Host port is 8080. This is a local host. So in local host 8080 port, my container should be running. And so at this 8080 host port is mapped with 80 of the container port. So now let me attach the volumes. You can attach your volumes here and you can attach your variables here. So what is volumes? It's a binding volumes, bind mounts. So these things, all these things we will do it using Linux machine using commands. This I'm showing, I want to give you a complete understanding. Like if you use a Docker desktop, it is pretty easy, damn easy. But all the operations won't happen in your Windows machine. All the operations will be done inside a server, a Linux server. So it's not that useful. Working with commands is the useful activity. So we're gonna work with commands excessively. Okay, but here we'll see one more example. This time I will give host path in same. I'll create a new folder. So I would say volume mount for nginx and select this folder. So container path name. Okay, container path. Variables is not required. Let me click OK. So docker run invoking remote method, docker run container, invalid volume specification, containerized application. Okay, volume specification, there is a issue with the volume specification, so we are not going to give volume specification, we will keep it same. Okay, here because it's a Windows machine, second container, and map 8080 host machine with the 80 of the container port, keep it same, run it. And now this part I want to explain. Okay, so that we are going to do, so this is logs. To get this we have to give logger docker log, then we will get the logs of the container. Okay, so logs of the container, we look into the logs of the container to troubleshoot the problems that we face in containers. Then we use docker inspect or docker exec, and docker inspect command and docker exec commands basically to inspect the docker container, to jump into the docker container and to see what is there inside the docker container, because docker container, docker image itself is another Linux machine. It's not exactly a Linux machine, but it is a miniature Linux OS. It will have all the directories of what Linux has. And terminal, this opens the pwd. See, this is a root. This is terminal of container, not ours. It's a terminal of container. ls, you see that what I told you, it's exactly a miniature, it's exactly a miniature model of a Linux OS. You see, you have serve, srv, sys, tmp, user, var, run, has been, root, proc, opt, mount, media, lib, home, etc. Everything you have. This is exactly a miniature version of uh, our Linux machine. So this is the terminal of Docker container, not ours, not Windows machine or not anything else. It's a terminal of Docker container. And this is stats. It's a 12.54 MB memory usage and 1016 bytes. And so let's get into let's open this browser. Let's open this application inside the browser. You see that? It's again opened. Okay. So let me get into the Docker desktop, and this is the container which is running. Let me stop it and kill it. This is what we call it as a kill it, and once it is killed I will delete this container. I'll delete this container, then I will come to the images and I will delete this also. This is called housekeeping of Docker, housekeeping of Docker engine room. So now our Docker desktop is cleaned. Okay, so now we can get out of the Docker desktop, and this is how we install the Docker desktop. We build our first application, we build our first image and we run our first container and we deploy our first application using Docker desktop. It's pretty easy without any Docker commands, sub commands, nothing is required. Just simply you can run your containers. You can spin your containers.